Welcome, Cougs and friends, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Geraldine Stevens, and I'm the Alumni Relations Coordinator for the College of Education and a graduate of the Bauer College. I'm so proud to serve as your MC for the evening. The College of Education and the University of Houston Alumni Association are excited to partner as we bring to you Navigating Through Crises, Tips for Managing Uncertainty. As we move into our discussion, I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips. During this event, everyone will be placed on mute. However, you will have an opportunity to interact and ask questions of our panelists. We encourage your participation and want to be sure that you feel safe and in a comfortable space. It's totally fine to turn off your camera, no problem. Please know the event is being recorded and closed captioning is also available. You can click Live Transcript to enable this feature. Finally, the recording and resources will be made available to you after the event. And now, without further ado, let's get started. With greetings from U of H Alumni Association, please welcome Mike Paday, Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations. Mike, take it on.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful evening on this beautiful November night here in Houston, wherever you may be joining us from around the globe. On behalf of our over 300,000 alumni at the University of Houston, 295,000 of those are still with us, 185,000 right here in the greater Houston area. 1 out of every 6 college graduates in Houston is a Cougar, and so many of those are from our College of Education. So we want to thank our friends at the College of Education, the dean and his whole team, and everyone in alumni relations and development over there, and of course their incredible faculty and staff for teaming up with us tonight on this very valuable webinar. We want to welcome everybody and hope that I give you a few tips to keep you connected to your alumni association very quickly. First, number 1, do you have your alumni app downloaded? Just go to the App Store, look for the UH2U app, download it, and you can find all the information you need right there to keep up with events, constituent alumni associations, ways to nominate someone for an award, tell us your class notes, you have a new job, a new member of the family, you've just gotten married, taken a trip, send all that to us so we can keep you connected. Second off, Cougs Connect, that's where you want to go. And it doesn't get any easier than www.cougsconnect. Of course, Cougs with 2 O's, no O's, 2 O's. On Cougs Connect, and you can stay connected to the University of Houston Alumni Association. You can find a mentor, be a mentor, post a job, join an alumni association, learn all the things that you need to know about our alumni association. And finally, these webinars we started doing, obviously, when our pandemic hit us about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now, and they've been wildly successful. And you can find not only this webinar, but past webinars on our website at houstonalumni.com. And just click on the webinar tab there, and you can read and follow all of the webinars we've done with the College of Education and our other colleges along the way. So on behalf of all of us, we want to thank our friends at the College of Education. I know you're going to get some valuable information this evening. We thank you so much for the collaboration. Everyone stay safe, have a wonderful holiday season. And Geraldine, back to you. Go Cougs.
Thanks, Mike. There's so many cool things happening, so alums, be sure to follow UHAA by checking out the links in the chat. Now, this is a great time to pause for a quick Cougs photo op. I want everyone to turn on your cameras and let's show some Cougar Pride by flashing the Cougs sign. And first, a big favor, if everyone will please hold your pose so we can get several screenshots, that would be great. Okay. Cameras on, and the count of 3, everyone show the Cougs sign and go and shout out, "Go Cougs." Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go Cougs.
Okay, the picture's good.
Also, while those cameras are on, I want to give a special shout out to all of our students joining us tonight. If you're a future alum, please give us a Cougs wave. Cool. Well, let's continue with our program. You're in for a treat this evening. You will hear from 4 great speakers as they discuss various crises affecting many of our lives and our communities. Our hope is tonight's discussion will provide you with advice, solutions, and even offer some time for introspection. We want you to walk away feeling empowered, so the very next time you or someone close to you faces a crisis, you feel better prepared and equipped to lean in and navigate with a sense of confidence, knowing that you will get through it. Also, please check out the chat. We have posted valuable resources that are available on campus and off campus. It's important to note these services support our students, faculty, staff, and community. Now let's get started with our first speaker. Tonight, we are spotlighting a College of Education grad, Principal Diana Castillo. Principal Castillo is a two-time U of H alumna and the principal of Houston Independent School District's Pilgrim Academy. It is an HISD school that serves an amazing student body comprised primarily of immigrants. She also has lots of Coug staff represented on site. I am proud to introduce to you Principal Diana Castillo. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. Principal Castillo, I know we had a chance to chat in advance, and you shared with me your firsthand experience of navigating through crises from both a personal and professional perspective. I'd like you to take a few moments to share with the audience the tragic events occurring in your personal life just before schools made the major announcement to go virtual as a result of COVID-19. Please share.
Thank you, Geraldine. Yes, I guess I need to go back a little bit further than that spring of 2020 that for us dramatically changed education as we know it. I myself am a new immigrant, just like my students, and I come from a very small family. And I was in a situation where my father had contracted a highly contagious respiratory disease that didn't have a vaccine. I had just spent 3 weeks in the hospital with my father, who eventually succumbed to that and got a crash course on some things that are way too familiar to us now: PPEs, N95 masks, gowns, ventilators, pulse oximeters. It was a very difficult time for me. My father passed away in February, and 6 weeks later, we were being pulled in to a principals meeting that rarely ever happens to talk about yet another highly contagious disease with no vaccine, and all the unknowns that we were being faced. We were told that there was a possibility that we would not come back after spring break. That was 2 days before. By the following day, they shut us down. Something completely unbelievable.
And with no roadmap to follow, Principal Castillo, tell us how you led your team and students amid this pandemic.
I guess as principals, and I've been very lucky to be here for 16 years, we can navigate floods in Houston. We can navigate hurricanes. I myself have spent, a couple of hurricanes, at our campus, but this did not have a face. I could not wrap my mind around it. I was in constant stress, all the time, fearful that someone would become infected and possibly die. It was an extremely stressful situation that I felt that I needed to rely on my staff and my leadership team specifically to help us get through something like this.
And how would you say your kids and staff are doing today?
They're doing wonderful. Our school is big. Actually, we're bigger than we were before we shut down. We are booming. The kids are back. Last year, we at the most had only, just a little over 50% of our kids, and they're all back, and we're so happy to have them back.
That's great. We also received a question from the audience, and so I'd like to pose the question, how can teachers offer support to students who may have lost family members during the pandemic? What would be your advice?
Navigating grief is very difficult for us personally. And to be put in a situation where you are helping, our most precious, little children is extremely, extremely difficult. Most of us don't know what to say. And children, are at very different stages of grief. And sometimes we prefer not to say anything, but that is not what we need to do. We need to just acknowledge it. We need to talk to them. We need to monitor our students and ask them, would you like to talk to the counselor? Would you like to talk to a favorite teacher? And just, allow them to speak to you. And that is probably the most important thing that we need to do, is just acknowledge it.
Great suggestions. Okay, our last question. What's the one key takeaway you want to leave with us tonight?
I think we need to allow ourselves to reflect, because at that point we'll realize how far we've gone and how much we've accomplished. And you've also realized how strong you are, because I think that's the one thing that we all feel is extremely vulnerable. But reflection allows us to realize all of the qualities that we already possess to help us navigate this crisis, or any crisis.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Principal Castillo. Very inspiring. I'm sure you're so proud of your team and your students. We look forward to hearing more from you during the Q&A session.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next up, I would like to introduce our very own Bob McPherson, Dean of the College of Education. Tonight, Dean McPherson will serve as our moderator. He is a graduate of the college with his PhD in counseling psychology. He started his career as both a teacher and guidance counselor. His background is so perfect for leading the discussion with our esteemed panelists. Please welcome Dean McPherson.
Thank you, Geraldine. I'm delighted to moderate tonight's panel. It's been a tough year and a half, but I'm glad we can come together tonight. We have a great group of faculty experts. They'll be speaking today from their perspective as researchers and from their lived experiences. Like many of you, they're working parents and navigating the pandemic with young kids. To start, I'd like to ask each panelist to give a brief overview of their topic. Dr. Ruth Lopez is an assistant professor in our K-12 school leadership program. Ruth.
Thank you, Dean. Today, I will be talking about my research with Latinx students during the pandemic, specifically Latinas. So along with my research collaborators, I've interviewed Latinas in their senior year of high school at the onset of the pandemic, and Latina college students and graduates as well. And this has really helped me understand their experiences transitioning from high school to college and even into their careers during a crisis. I'll also be sharing about my own experiences as the mother of a child participating in a COVID-19 clinical research trial, and how this led to my understanding of younger Latinx children's experiences during the pandemic. And then also how this has led to open discussions around community care within my own family. One of the biggest reflections that I've been having about COVID-19 is how it's another equity issue, deeply impacting the Latinx community and other communities of color, along with other overlapping systemic inequities. So I look forward to sharing more in a bit.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Our next panelist is Dr. Blake Allen. He's director of our counseling psychology doctoral program. Blake?
Thank you, Dean. I'm pleased to be here, and welcome to everyone who's joined us. So my topic, what I study in my research, is essentially what it means to have a bad job. And so if you all think of all the jobs you've had and think of the worst job and why it was a bad job. I'm really interested in hearing about that and understanding how that relates to your mental health. So bad jobs could mean a lot of things. It could mean that you were poorly paid, that it was really unstable. You didn't know whether you were going to be able to maintain your work, or maybe you had a really bad supervisor who harassed you and so on. And so I'm interested broadly in how the social factors that would lead you to end up with that bad job and how that would affect your mental health more broadly. And so this is my child. We're talking about how COVID as well has completely changed our experience of working. I'm sitting at home right now. We're getting visitations from my 4-year-old and my Springer Spaniel, and maybe from my infant later. And so COVID has really created a lot of uncertainty and degraded the quality of work for so many people. And so that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today, and clearly getting some of my lived experience too.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. We look to hearing more. And last but certainly not least, Dr. April Peters Hawkins serves as an associate department chair in the College of Education and is a former teacher, principal, and school social worker. Dr. Peters Hawkins.
Thank you, Dean, and good evening, everyone. So broadly, my research really investigates leadership, race, and education. And so tonight I'd like to talk specifically about having the brave conversations about race and talking to children. And I approach this not only from the standpoint of a scholar, but more importantly, from the standpoint of a parent who is raising 2 Black sons. And as I thought about this presentation, one of the things that occurred to me is that we're talking about this moment of navigating crisis, but the reality is that race has been a controversial and challenging topic basically since the founding of this country. And from my perspective, any conversation about race should also include the idea of racism, because those two are very connected in many ways. So in this moment of a pandemic, coupled with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, we've begun to see this national conversation of racial reckoning in some spaces. Conversely, in other spaces, these events underscore some deep racial resentment and hostility. And so as adults, our behaviors concerning race and how we discuss it, the ways in which we engage implicitly and explicitly, really telegraphs a message to our young people. And so it's important for us to have these healthy conversations about race and how do we do that, right? And that not only includes what we do as parents in the home, but also what schools could be doing to teach kids about race and honoring diverse cultures. I'll talk about this more later, but this is really important because many children's first experience about race and its value-laden nature happens at school at a young age. Also, it's important because as we look at, as researchers at the disparate outcomes for kids, that happens in schools in terms of exclusionary discipline, overrepresentation of white and to some degree Asian students in gifted and advanced placement courses, overrepresentation often of Black and brown children in special ed and in the school to prison pipeline, a talk we gave not too long ago. And then things like the racial opportunity gaps. So in today's discussion, I really hope to share some historical background about race and racism, the impact on children, and even conclude by providing some tips for how we have these brave conversations with kids.
Thank you, Dr. Peters Hawkins. Thank you all. And now let's delve a little bit deeper. Dr. Lopez, can you elaborate a bit more on your previous comments?
Yes, of course. Sorry, I was taking myself off mute there. Yes, of course. So I wanted to summarize some findings, that I've gotten from some of the interviews I've been doing. And so I'm going to elaborate on 2 of the studies, particularly as it relates to Latinx students navigating the pandemic. So in one of the studies, I've been interviewing early college, high school Latina graduates, the semester they graduated, which was actually the first few months of the pandemic in 2020. And now a year after they graduated high school and transferred to college. So it's a longitudinal study, and we've been able to really see what the short-term effects were of the pandemic, while they were transitioning to college and now a year out. And even just today, I interviewed a student who shared, I still feel like I'm living in the pandemic. So when talking, she was saying this in regards to the fact that she's taking all her classes online still. But she actually also talked about it in a positive way. She liked the option of having the virtual classes that allow her to work full time while going to school. She's in community college. So perhaps there's affordances to providing a virtual option for students. Students have also shared their responsibilities as caretakers to younger relatives and elders. Sometimes these elders recovering from COVID-19. Some have shared that they'd had to help their siblings with online school while they were in their own classes, and saying that their professors never saw this. And sometimes they were in the same room. In some ways, I think they didn't want to be viewed or stigmatized, as maybe less serious students. And then something else that came up was the lack of access to internet. That was a challenge for some students as well. One student driving to a church parking lot to be able to use their Wi-Fi. And this was particularly the case at the beginning of the pandemic. So access to technology is a big equity piece here, which we hear a lot about right now at the federal level, and providing internet access to low-income communities. And lastly, and I think is really important for the audience we have here today, is that students have shared about the impact of caring educators. So either through high school or through college, those educators that were there going through it with them, right, with the pandemic, as well as you've seen from all three of us who are parents here as well, and who also went the extra mile to be flexible and supportive. So even now that things have sort of returned to a normal pace, that they are still remain flexible. So they shared a lot about that. In another study, I've been interviewing Latina students that are in the university and also graduating. And the study is now actually in its 5th year. And we talk to students about once or twice a year. So in a way, I got to hear their perspectives as college students before the pandemic and now during the pandemic. So I'm going to summarize a few key points today, but there's just so much here. But just some highlights, that relate to the conversation today. So one thing during the pandemic is that their family responsibilities increased at home while they were also attending virtual classes. One student referred to herself as the family assistant. But she was also really proud of the way that she's able to help her family. So one of the things is also taking an asset-based perspective of these students, they're taking on a lot, but it's also a point of pride for them. Some have adjusted the way they see their future goals. So their goals being more about the short term rather than the long term, given the uncertainty that the pandemic has shown them. So I used to have a question about, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? This was before the pandemic. And through conversations with them, through different interviews, I've realized that it's they actually prefer for me to ask them about next year. Their goals have remained high, high aspirations for themselves, but this pandemic just changed their perspective a bit. Another piece is that mental health is really salient, and students just are more open talking about their mental health and how the pandemic affected this. So in terms of your question of how to support, I find that in both of these studies, there's a power in acknowledging their lived realities. And then lastly, I'll just share really quickly that my son was in the pediatric clinical trial for Moderna through the Baylor College of Medicine, Houston. And so that gave me insight again into what this pandemic has been like for young children, how they've been affected. We hear about the disparities and disproportionate impact on communities of color. So when he had the opportunity to be part of this study, we talked about the impact of this for our community. And so it's, like I mentioned in my introduction, we've had conversations about community care and what it means to be part of something like this. And so we're sharing our story, through the media. And something I've been saying is that vaccines aren't fun, even for me, but just talking about the greater purpose of this process has been really key. And I've just learned a lot in our conversation. So I think right now is just an interesting phase of, of things. And I'm really fortunate to be able to witness their stories from elementary to post-college.
Thanks, Dr. Lopez. Could you give us just real quickly your takeaways and final thoughts?
Yes, of course. So I was about to go into them earlier, so I'm glad I stopped myself there. So thank you. Otherwise, I'll keep talking. Thank you so much. So one of them, and I think it touches on what Principal Castillo said earlier, how important it is to capture students' experiences during this crisis. So for me, data collection has been harder because now it's virtual, right? So we're on Zoom. So in some ways it's different. I would say it's different, but it's also made me see a different aspect of students' lives. And throughout the process, I've talked to many students. They've reminded me that these interviews are important and that they're glad that other students are being interviewed too, because they say the pandemic is still affecting them. Even a student that I interviewed just this week said, I hope that you interview the future classes, not just class of 2020, because students are still going through the pandemic. And so I say this from a researcher perspective, but I think, connected again to what Principal Castillo said, allowing students to share their stories is so important. The next one is about, I've realized the importance of sharing my own experience. It's been kind of a vulnerable process to share that my son was part of this vaccine study, but I told myself, if I'm asking my participants to share about how the pandemic affected them, then I see my sharing in public about my family's experience with this vaccine as a way of putting myself out there, just like my participants in my study have put themselves out there for my research. So, luckily I've heard, a lot of feedback from different people in my community that share how impactful it has been to see our experience out there and sort of destigmatize the process, of the vaccine. But lastly, I'll just say that, it's been the last couple of weeks, just a little analogy for everything is that we've been working on our community garden at my children's elementary school, and the garden had been left there almost frozen at the start of the pandemic, and slowly but surely we're working on it again. And so I think that's my takeaway, is that slowly but surely we're tending to, our lives in this way. And so just hearing the students, I'm getting to see that, right? How they're coming back and from this now a year after the pandemic and continuing to work towards their goals. And I'm just really happy to have been able to witness their stories.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez, and what a wonderful metaphor to describe our coming back from the pandemic. Next, Dr. Allen, could you elaborate a bit more on your thoughts about work and mental health?
Sure. So broadly speaking, the quality of work in the United States and actually globally has been degrading for a long time. And there are a lot of different reasons for why that has been happening. So things like automation, globalization, increasing wealth inequality, and so on. And so in the 20th century, the norm was more so to have these permanent, stable, full-time jobs. And those are giving way to part-time, unstable, insecure jobs. And so a good example that we kind of all can relate to is taxi drivers turning into Uber drivers. And so instead of getting regular benefits, guaranteed minimum wage, you have more flexibility, which is a good thing. You can choose when and how you work and so on, but you're not getting those benefits more broadly. And so that's happening. We can all think of ways across the platform economy and in different ways. Now, one kind of caveat to that is that these sort of low quality work, in the way that I think about it, has been the norm for vulnerable and marginalized populations in the United States. So populations like migrant workers, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, people with disabilities, and so on. So that has been the norm, but it's becoming even more widespread. And as it becomes more widespread, vulnerable populations are the ones who are most affected by that. So that's what's happening anyway. And then all of a sudden, COVID comes along and it exposes and exacerbates these existing trends and inequities in the labor market. And so we see huge layoffs, of course, like we all remember this, right? Lost wages, lost hours. And we were all, really struggling during that time, while we also have these furloughs and a complete restructuring of how we work. Again, as I mentioned before, we're on Zoom instead of in person. We would have been probably in person if it weren't for COVID. And so things like the blurring of lines between work and home. That's clearly happening. It, just happened to me. And so broadly speaking, there has been these experiences of loss in different ways in our life. And Principal Castillo mentioned that as well. We have kind of loss, losing people we love, but also losing our sense of security in our work, our sense of safety and health. And so I actually just saw the question pop up in the chat. I wanted to mention that. So there's a lot of ways to define low quality work. In one particular way that I focus on quite a bit are low wage temporary jobs that are usually part-time. So one example is you would have a part-time job so that you don't have to give benefits. So a lot of companies do that. And so we had one study at the beginning of the pandemic. We were just doing this longitudinal study on this topic. And then all of a sudden, COVID hits. We weren't expecting it at all. So we could actually use that data set to look at some things. So people who had these sort of low quality jobs were far more likely to lose their jobs. They were the ones being laid off. And they were also, even if people with these low quality jobs kept their job, they were much less likely to be able to meet their basic needs, to meet also their basic psychological needs, like their needs to connect with other people at work and so on and so forth. And that related to decreases in mental health as the pandemic continued. And so in many ways, the pandemic has been this double-edged sword because there are these benefits. So for certain people, like parents, increased flexibility can be a great thing. You can get the kids to school, you can work from home when you can, and people are really appreciating and liking that flexibility. But there are also these negatives as well. So, we'll get more chance to talk kind of going forward. But one thing that I really challenge us to think about is that during this pandemic, it's an opportunity to kind of reframe how we think about work and to prioritize fulfilling life in general and human rights.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. What would be the key takeaways you would like for folks to take away from your presentation?
Sure. Yeah. So I think in the United States, it's a highly individualistic culture. So we tend to blame people for their individual work situation. Like if they're unemployed, we tend to blame that person, or if they have a poor quality job, we tend to blame people. And as a result, us as people, we tend to blame ourselves. We internalize that and blame ourselves for the work situation that we have. And so I really want to challenge us all to start changing that narrative and really understand that these are big structural, historical things that are happening that are leading to things like unemployment and underemployment. And the other, just one more piece I wanted to mention too, is, in 1948, we adopted the UN Resolution of Human Rights. I think Eleanor Roosevelt was the chair of that committee. And Article 23 says really clearly that people have the right to employment, protection from unemployment, fair pay that allows for an existence of human dignity, equal pay for equal rights, etc. So we've had these as installed by the United Nations as basic human rights since 1948. And clearly we're not fulfilling those in many ways. So I want to challenge that narrative and replace it with a narrative where we're prioritizing human rights when we talk about work and equity more broadly.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Dr. April Peters Hawkins, can you elaborate more on your previous discussion?
Yes, thank you so much. So before we do that, or before I get into talking, I would like to make this a little bit interactive. So let me just set this up before they load the clip. So I have a very brief video clip that I'd like to show you. And what I'd like to say in advance of this is that you'll see a young man in the video. This video was shot during the school day. during a weekday. And what I'd like the audience to do is to, when you see the video, in the chat, please indicate what you think the young man's age is, as well as what he's doing in this video clip and why. And then I'll give you a little bit more detail about that. Okay, so please just take a few seconds. You don't need dissertations or proposal length responses, but just a few lines to indicate what you think he's doing. The video is looping again. Oh no, it's not. Okay, but what did you think? What did you see? What was he doing? Nobody's going to be a brave soul to put it out there. And so, couple, yes. Okay. And I guess one of the things I want people to also respond to, you see him hiding, but why? Why do you think he's hiding? And as you grapple with that, what I'd like to say is that this video actually did go viral, and it went, the young man's father posted the video. So, and he posted it, this young man also, I should say, lives in Connecticut. And when his dad, you know, there's a home surveillance system, and he was have cameras on our homes. The dad saw it while he was at work, and when he got home, he asked the child why he hid. Right, the kids outside playing basketball. Police come by, and then he hides. And the young man said they killed George Floyd. And so he saw the police car, associated the police with the murder of George Floyd, and hid himself. And so, so some of you may have seen that. That video clip. And so I want to talk about that a little bit because the murder of George Floyd is one of many examples of why we should discuss race with children, right? And how we should have those conversations as part of this discussion tonight. So, you know, one of the things we see is sort of the 24-hour news cycle, constant images of unarmed Black bodies being policed, Black and brown immigrants being treated inhumanely, violence and hate acts against Asians, and so on. And so these events and the fact that we continue to cycle through them through the news and other spaces provide an impetus for age-appropriate, sensitive conversations with kids about race. So for all of you who said that he was 10 to 12, 9 years old, stopped what he was doing to hide from the police, you're right. And he is young, he's 10 in this video. So a star for you for understanding what was happening there. I was curious about the age because a lot of times with certain race children, there's an adultification, like we tend to see them as older, but he's just a 10-year-old kid. And so in this moment, we have these incidences like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and others. But I want to think for a minute historically, because for young people, race is not just salient in this moment, but historically. And so I want to just bring to mind two pretty historic cases that I do not have time to unpack for you, but I'm going to tell you what they are so that you can go and read up on them. So one involves, one case is the Mendez versus Westminster School District of California. It was tried in 1947 and through the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit. So that case was really about, Sylvia Mendez became the face of that case. She's a young Mexican girl. And the argument that her family and others were making was that the children were being segregated to Mexican schools. And that was not legal, really. And the court found that that wasn't legal. There are a lot of other nuances to this case. And that was only happening in California. Interestingly enough, at that time, Mexican people were considered white in many places in this country. So you should read up on that. The other case, many of you have heard of, and that's the Brown v. Board of Education case. And again, this is a case about segregation and about children attending schools. And that was tried and went to the Supreme Court in 1954. Related to that case, though, got me thinking, because I do a lot of research and I do think that the history of this is important, were some doll studies that were done to really think about the impact of segregation and racism on children of color. So there was some work done by a psychologist named Mamie Clark and her husband, and they actually were psychologists who testified in a number of different segregation cases. starting in 1947, they did this doll study. Again, I'd encourage you to read up on that information. But it's important to understand the outcome of that. And the outcome of that was that they found that Black children had a preference toward white dolls, the sort of pedestrian outcome of that. But the larger implications were that Black children formed a racial identity by the age of 3, and they attached the negative trait to their own identity, which were perpetuated by segregation and prejudice. Fast forward to 2010, CNN replicated this study in a number of places and found similar activities. A couple last things I want to say. There's an activity that I do with my class, and most of my students, all of my students are graduate students. And I ask them, when's the first time they notice that a value-laden difference, specifically that privileges some and oppresses others as it relates to race. Almost universally, people acknowledge that that happens in elementary school, at the elementary school age and in school. So this provides us the impetus to think about race and the impact of race for young children. And so it's important to talk to all children about race. And as with adults, children of different races will experience race differently, but open discussions with all kids go a long way, I think, in developing equity-oriented adults.
Thank you, Dr. Peters Hawkins. Are there any particular takeaways you would like to underscore?
Yeah, there are a few. And I probably don't have time to work all of them out, but I will say a couple things. One, we all have a race. So we should normalize talking to children about race. We've sort of made race conversations taboo. And I think that when we do that, children understand that they make meaning of that. They think that it's inappropriate to have those conversations. And so we should normalize it. I think we should also provide age-appropriate balanced discussions of historic events. And I can talk more about that if there are questions. I think whenever possible, we should create opportunities to engage with different races, to learn about different cultures, and to provide those opportunities to kids. And then finally, I think that we should, this representation matters. So books, media, toys, etc., should be inclusive of positive messaging around marginalized groups. So I'll tell you a quick story. My kids and I were in the store the other day, and there was a lady who asked us if we wanted to take pictures with Santa. Now, I have a 6-year-old who is sort of teetering on whether or not he believes in Santa. Anyway, so that's a whole other issue. But what I said to the lady is, does Santa look like us? And she said no. She also looked like me, but she said no. And I said, well, we don't take pictures with Santa if he doesn't look like us, because I think my children, we have pajamas with Black Santas on them. It's important, I think, to see that representation. The other thing I'll say is that I bought my son this book called Something Happened in Our Town, which discusses a police shooting from a variety of racial perspectives. And we read that story. And so my last tip is that we don't force the conversations. We open the door, we provide the representation, we provide the resources, and then we let the children come to us and ask us the questions. And so we read the book, and then I asked my child if he wanted to follow up and read the book again, and he's not ready for that yet. He doesn't want to do that, but the book is here, and we have that resource as we need it.
And thank you very much, Dr. Peters Hawkins. And by the way, we're on track. We're on time right now. So you guys have done a great job keeping to the time limit. Thanks to all of you for your valuable expertise. I know we've all learned a lot. And now back to Geraldine to continue the program.
Thanks, Dean McPherson. I echo your sentiments. Panelists, we really appreciate your expertise. That said, I'm sure the audience has more questions for you. So let's transition to the Q&A part of the program. For those of you who have questions, now is the time to submit them via the chat, and you can do so by going to your drop-down menu and selecting the name displayed as Q&A. For those of you who submitted questions in advance, we appreciate it. We'll kick off the Q&A with one of those questions. My colleague, Erica Mellon, will lead the Q&A discussion. Erica?
Hello, thank you all. Thanks, Geraldine. Let's get right to it. I think most of us can relate to this first question. As the pandemic drags on, I feel burned out and have lost motivation. What are some practices I can implement every day to combat this unproductive stage? I'm hoping you each can offer one tip for us. We'll go alphabetically. Dr. Allen, Allen, Castillo, Lopez, Peters, Hawkins. Thank you.
So the first thing is, I would say, work on accepting that it's okay not to be productive during this time, because it's an extremely stressful and difficult time. But it also is really important to take care of yourself. I mean, I know the conversation about self-care comes up a lot. And so one thing that can be helpful is, if you've ever heard of like habit stacking, but it's this idea of taking something you do every day, like brushing your teeth, and adding a self-care activity to that, like, meditating for 5 minutes or doing 10 push-ups or whatever it is. I'm really glad that Dr. Lopez mentioned this too, because we can't just do self-care. We need to do community care. So we also need to be thinking of ways to take care of each other, to reach out to people that we care about and offer support.
Absolutely. I think self-care is what helped me get through some of this. I think we really need to look into what is going to bring us joy. For me, it was walking. As simple as that was, all of us have these huge ambitious goals that we're going to run a marathon, but it was just a matter of, after a meeting, walking out of my front door and just taking a nice stroll. That helped me so much. And it's the one thing that I continue to do that I really enjoyed. But I think we all need to find our joy and just stick with it and not panic. It never helps.
Okay, so yeah, I co-sign on everything that's been mentioned, but I think something right now that I keep reminding myself, because it seems that the pace of the world is sort of at this like normal, air quotes, pace. So I tell myself there's still a pandemic happening. And so when I catch myself doing that self-talk, I think Dr. Allen talked a bit about it, and it resonated, right? About like how we start internalizing these pressures. And so I tell myself that. And sometimes there's just things beyond my control. Like my children have been home twice during the semester due to a positive COVID exposure at school. So, work keeps going. And so some of the things that have really helped me is to have accountability support groups and virtual writing groups. And so I'm part of a group through the University of Houston. Dr. Peters, Hawkins, and I are part of the Women of Color Coalition, which is a faculty group supported by the provost. And so we have virtual writing groups. And that's been a great place to just jump in and get some writing done together in community in a virtual space. And it really, it's really gotten gotten me through a lot. And we've been meeting since the beginning of the pandemic. And we're still going strong. So I just want to give credit to that community. And also I make non-negotiables for myself. And I thought this morning, because there's just so many deadlines right now. And I imagine as students too, you might be facing so many deadlines before the end of the year. And so I told myself, what are my non-negotiables for this semester? Because I'm very inclined to just dive in, and do all the work, do all the things. And so I said, my non-negotiables as the semester is ending, no matter what deadlines there are, is to sleep at least 7 hours a night, and to continue working out, and to prioritize rest and family on weekends. I know sometimes I'm going to have to work on weekends, but at least like this Sunday I was working, but we went to the zoo in the morning, so just trying to balance it out a bit, because I need to take care of me to be able to take care of my family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's not a whole lot I can add, but I will say something that I've said to students and friends: give yourself grace, right? We are in this moment. The moment's not over yet. So how we move is different than we might move in a different normal. I think it's important to set small incremental goals and reward yourself when you accomplish them. And then the last thing, and I get this from my husband because I have been addicted to like all things news, and it's to also give yourself space to unplug, to move back from that, particularly when we have an emotional, I think, and psychological response to what we hear and see. And this goes back to some of the things I was talking about, even with kids. And so it's important to create a different kind of space that doesn't always internalize what we might think of as negative images, even though it's news and it's facts or alternative facts, depending on what you're watching. But I think it's important to unplug.
Great, thank you. Those tips were so helpful. So non-negotiables, small goals, rewards, and unplug, but not from this webinar just yet. Okay, we're going to hop back to Dr. Allen on the job front. Can you offer some advice for people who may be searching for a job now during this time of uncertainty? We have some students on the call, maybe entering the workforce, or maybe some mid-career professionals looking to get out of that bad job. What advice can you offer?
Yeah, so that's a little tough because each person's situations is really unique in terms of what you need and what you're doing for searching for a job. At the beginning of your work life, you might not have a good sense of what your career is yet. I mean, what this sort of rapid change of the labor market, like new jobs are appearing out of nowhere and jobs are disappearing because they're getting automated, et cetera, that really, in the literature, what researchers talk a lot about is career adaptability and flexibility, that sort of being willing to understand what you intrinsically love doing and understand that there's lots of different career paths and different work that you can do that can fulfill that. So it's sort of like your work is not a soulmate. It's not like there's one thing out there for you. There's lots of things that you can do that would be good. And there's also a lot of decades and decades of research of like what makes an effective job search. And so those are things like being proactive, working on your interviewing skills, like learning how to do anxiety reduction, like we're going to do a breathing exercise later, using all available sources and things like that. And and a big one, like Dr. Hawkins mentioned, is setting goals. Like I'm going to apply to X number of jobs this week, or I'm going to check X number of things. The final thing I'll say is that you cannot do a job search by yourself. You need help. So if you're a student at UH, I mean, the Career Center is super helpful. Go to the Career Center, get some help. Get help from your social networks, your friends, your family. Tell them what's going on, tell them what you're doing, get them to review your resume and your cover letters and so on. And that really applies across the lifespan. You need to marshal your resources, the support that you have in your life and other community resources. One-stop career shop is another thing if you're outside of school. One-stop career shops are the government facilities to help people get jobs. So that's a good resource as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, work is not your soulmate. I'm going to put that on my computer. I got it. I'm going to ask you one more work-related question. This is a hot topic for the night. For folks who have dealt with bullying at work, the pandemic shutdown actually did help in a way with remote work. As folks are coming back into the office, do you have any tips for how we kind of navigate the stress and anxiety about returning to what may be considered a toxic environment or may feel like that?
Yeah, and so this is kind of, I appreciate this comment. This is, sort of how the pandemic has been a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. If people are in really toxic and abusive work environments, then of course, getting out of that environment can really help with that. It's difficult for me to say specifically what any individual should do. Part of it is, really coming back to making sure that marshaling those support networks to work towards figuring out a solution. Of course, seeking mental health professionals when that's helpful to get that support as well. There's also why am I blanking on the name? There are sort of community resources that you can go to that can help with abusive environments as well. I'm not sure if Dr. Lopez or Dr. Hawkins or Principal Castillo have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, Principal Castillo, as the leader of a school, when you were bringing your folks back, was there anything you did to try and create a supportive environment, a sense of normalcy? Can you give some tips
Yeah.
for any leaders on this call?
Absolutely. I think, you really do need to be aware that a lot of folks dealt with trauma. I guess, being at home, being isolated, that could be very, very debilitating. One of the things that was very important for me was, to start working on relationships again, checking in on my folks. Even when we brought them back there, it was still not, it was October, almost November, where, the COVID was still there. There were, the vaccine wasn't anywhere really, in sight, if you will. So we were still extremely cautious. So it was important to be able to, be there for them, what little we could do to make it feel like you're back at home. I remember the very first day that our staff came back, we were at the door. Most of us hadn't been together in a very long time. Some of the folks I didn't even recognize because with the mask, it was really difficult. We did something as simple as playing music and cheered them all as they were coming in. Of course, maintaining our 6 feet distance, but at the time it was just something that we wanted to bring some, just hope back that it's not exactly what we would have expected, but you were coming back to a place where we wanted you to be there, and try to do small things like that to build those relationships and and work on getting together and coming together as a family. I think that's something that's really important that we still do now, and certainly very important in the first stages of folks that are coming back to work.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. I want to bring us back to the topic of equity, which everyone talked about today. As we work to make this uncertain world we're in more just, how can we measure progress? What can each of us be doing? I'm going to start with Dr. Lopez and then Dr. Peters-Hawkins.
Thank you. And I just answered a question in the chat as well. So I wanted to make sure I addressed that. But yeah, in terms of what we can be doing for equity, I think I'm going to tie it back to the research that I've been doing and just continue to get the perspectives from the people most affected, from the most marginalized students, families, and communities. And so again, I mentioned a few times that I just feel really fortunate that they've shared their stories with me. And so I often make it known to them, how important it is, and just taking those stories with a lot of care too. So it's one thing I do. And the other thing is to continue to document and collect data on issues pertaining to equity and disparities, even in light of current climate where there's a pressure not to focus on this due to the backlash against equity issues. So there's gonna be a pressure to not talk about equity, to not talk about racism, but just to continue, I think those of us on the panel today have done a lot of work and research regarding equity issues in different realms. And so just how important it is to continue to do that work. I think if you're a student working on this research, your work matters now more than ever. It's just so timely. So I just encourage you to stay on this road. Dr. Peters.
Yes, hi. I underscore everything that Dr. Lopez just said. The only thing I would add is that, as leaders, as educators, our job is to provide the space for people to be heard and then to be fierce advocates for change as needed. So we have to walk boldly into that, not fearlessly, because that's, not always possible, but to be bold in that. I think we also have to look to history to, sort of diagram our progress toward the future. So we can't ignore the things that have already been done along the way to advance these efforts. And then I think that, we can identify sites of resistance. Dr. Lopez talked about, pushing forward and and resisting really essentially in spite of things that are happening to sort of shut down some of these conversations, including at a political level. But I think, John Lewis talked about good trouble, and I'm just a firm believer in that notion of good trouble. And I think we do have to trouble some waters. We have to be fierce advocates for getting in good trouble, because my passion is kids. And, when I was a principal, I used to think about the fact that if I don't get in here and do something different, then I'm allowing people to kill kids on my watch every day in little ways, by 1,000 different cuts, right? And so it's important to take that charge seriously, and then to think about the space in which we can operate to make change. And we can't go it alone, right? We have to find our partners in this work. So hopefully our alumni and our students are finding those partners in different spaces along with faculty, and getting some confidence to know that there are people out here who actually want to lead the charge to do this work with you.
Thank you so much. That's really great advice. Let's all walk boldly together and cause good trouble. For those of you whose questions we didn't get to, feel free to post them in the chat, and maybe some of our presenters can answer them as we continue to the next part. I know the basketball game is starting. Stick around a little bit longer. We're almost done. Geraldine, back to you.
Thanks, Erica. Again, a special thank you to our esteemed alumna and panelists for offering tips to help us manage and cope when navigating through crises. Now for a quick commercial break. Everyone on the call tonight will have a chance to enter a contest and win some fun Coug swag. I will reveal the details of the contest following the mindfulness exercise, so please stay tuned. Next up, please welcome Dr. Bradley Smith, a professor of school psychology in the College of Education, along with one of his students, Carolyn, who will guide us through a mindfulness activity. Over to you, Dr. Smith and team.
Am I unmuted now? All right. So it was mentioned a couple of times today that it's worthwhile take some time and engage in mindful practices. And Carol and I have a couple of practices we think you'll be very helpful in dealing with some of the stressors that we come across. And part of it is developing just a sense of present time awareness. And one of the best tools for doing that is your breath. So just start out with a couple of fundamental breath techniques, and then Carolyn's going to lead us through an exercise that combines breath, movement, and intention that kind of takes mindfulness up to another level. So to start out with, we're just going to do some deep, slow breathing, which is a well-established, popular practice that helps people relax and deal with stress. And it's different than regular breathing because you try to engage your lungs fully and completely. And the way you tell that your lungs are being engaged fully and completely is because your belly moves in and out while you're breathing. So if I can invite you to just go ahead and take a comfortable seated position. And just notice how it feels when you take a breath in. You can take a breath out. Now try putting a hand on your belly. And when you breathe in, try to breathe in a way that you feel your belly fill out and move away from your spine. And on your exhale, let your belly button travel back towards your spine. Really, almost even push the air out a little bit. Get a complete exhale. And inhale slowly. Belly fills. Maybe feel your shoulders also rise up, your chest expands. And exhale. Exhale fully and completely, even more than you normally do. So you're going to complete exchange of air. Inhale. Belly out. Exhale, belly button towards your spine. So that's the foundation of just deep, slow breathing. The more you practice that, the better you'll get at it, and the more effective it'll be for you. Another type of breathing that's also very helpful is sometimes called square breathing. And what's nice about this form of breathing, it really brings you in the present moment, and it lets you notice that part of breathing is the pause between breaths. Just like a lot of life, it's the pauses between things you might want to notice. That's actually one of the things that musicians often appreciate is the pause between notes. And we can do that with our breath. And one well-established way of doing that, and there's a lot of different variations on this, but this is one of those nice, even, regular breaths and pauses. So we can start out, we'll do a count of 4, and don't start yet, but we will inhale for a count of 4, pause for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and then pause for a count of 4. So let's go ahead, wherever you're on your breath, exhale fully, and inhale for a count of 4, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4. Continue with the symmetrical breathing, but maybe now at your own pace. So you count at your own pace. Maybe you count 3, maybe you count 4, but you keep it even with the inhales, the pauses, and exhale. And do that for a few cycles on your own. And again, this is a technique that if you practice this, you'll become more automatic, more powerful. And like Dr. Allen was suggesting, this is something you kind of program in as a habit during your day and can really help lower your stress level. And now we'll have another really neat technique that Carolyn Musa will lead us to.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I always like to preface my meditations for those who have never meditated before with that there's no wrong way to meditate, and I'll try to guide you through it the best that I can. Okay, so bring yourself to a comfortable seated position again. And if you'd like, you can soften your gaze or close your eyes. And bring your attention to your natural breathing. Let's take a deep breath together. And take another one on my count. Inhaling for 3 and exhaling for 6. Inhale, 2, 3, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Take a moment to notice how your body's feeling right now. Notice how your hands are feeling. Now bring your attention to an emotion, a thought, or a belief that you would like to let go of. Now I'm going to give you instructions on what to do as you inhale and exhale. As you inhale, gradually close your hand tightly to match the way you feel about this emotion, thought, or belief. And as you exhale, loosen your hand as you release this emotion, thought, or belief from your grasp. Now let's try that with an inhale for 3 counts and an exhale for 6. Close your hand and inhale for 1, 2, 3, and relax your hand and exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice how your hands are feeling now. Notice how your body is feeling. Now, bring your attention to an emotion, thought, or belief that that you would like to bring closer to you. And as you inhale, loosely relax your hand to match the way you feel about this emotion, thought, or belief. As you exhale, tighten your hand as you bring in this emotion, thought, or belief closer to you. So we'll repeat that with an inhale for 3 and an exhale for 6. Relax your hand as you inhale for 1, 2, 3, and close your hand and exhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice how your hands are feeling now. How's your body feeling? We often have thoughts, emotions, or beliefs that we think we want to hold on to or that we want to let go of. Give these things your attention once in a while. Be aware of yourself. Be aware of the people around you and how they affect your emotions and your awareness of yourself and your relationship with the world. Now, as you feel ready to, blink open your eyes and slowly bring movement back to your fingers and come back to this moment with one more big deep breath to bring us back to this moment together. Thank you.
So those are a couple of techniques we hope that you'll find helpful in your day-to-day life. There's a variety of other techniques. If you're interested, and you can learn more about this through the Mindful Cougar student organization. If you go to mindfuluh.org, we have a bunch of material focused there. We'd be happy to have you connect with us there, or some of our events, which are posted on our social media.
Thanks, mindfulness team. Self-care is so important, and these are great exercises we can incorporate into our daily lives to help us relieve stress when going through a crisis. Be sure to check out the chat for helpful tips for practicing mindfulness. Now for your chance to win some fun prizes with our CougsConnect.com contest. Over the next 24 hours, please visit CougsConnect.com and look for our post. If you're not already a member, please sign up. It is free and easy to join. Once registered, there are three easy steps. Step 1, log into CougsConnect.com. Step 2, find our post. Step 3, comment with your favorite takeaway from tonight's event. You will automatically be included in the drawing. We will announce five lucky winners. Check out the chat for the link. Well, this concludes our program for the evening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation on navigating through crises, and we hope you found some valuable tips. If you missed anything, this recording will be posted on the UH alumni site. Also, you will receive a survey about tonight's event. Please take the time to complete it. We really welcome your feedback. Now, this concludes our program for the evening. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Have a great night. Go Cougs.